My name is Eleanor. For the last 3 years, my life has been defined by a silence that is as vast and pristine as the house I live in. It's a beautiful home, the one my late husband David and I built together, but a house without laughter or footsteps echoing in the hall is just a collection of rooms. My days follow a quiet, predictable rhythm. I tend to the garden, I read, I manage the portfolio David left behind. It's a comfortable existence, but comfort can feel like a cage when you're the only one in it. My daughter, Sophia, is away at college in California, a bright spark living her own adventure, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But her absence deepens the quiet. The house is too big for one person, filled with the ghosts of a life that was once bustling and full. I miss the sound of David's keys in the lock, the smell of his coffee in the morning, the easy way we occupied space together. Now, it's just me, moving through these polished, empty spaces, trying not to feel like a ghost myself. I grew up with very little, in a row home in South Philadelphia where the walls were thin and dreams were practical. My parents worked tirelessly, my father at the shipyard and my mother as a seamstress. Their love a steady, quiet force that taught me the value of resilience. I was the first in my family to go to college, a fact my parents announced with a pride that still warms me. I met David there. He was brilliant, ambitious, and saw a fire in me that I hadn't even recognized in myself. Together, we built a life I could have never imagined, a world of security and opportunity. We promised each other we would never forget where we came from, that we would always use our good fortune to lift others up. But after he was gone, that promise felt hollow. I had the means, but the purpose felt lost, adrift in a sea of grief. Most of my interactions are transactional. The woman at the grocery store, the man at the dry cleaners, the endless stream of couriers who bring packages to my door. They are fleeting presences, a brief exchange of pleasantries before they retreat back to their own lives, leaving me once again in the stillness. I order things online more than I need to, I think, just to have a reason to see another human face at my door, a small punctuation in the long, silent sentence of my day. This particular day began like any other. The sun was casting long shadows across the immaculate lawn, a perfect, crisp spring morning that felt almost painfully beautiful. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, when the doorbell rang. I had ordered some obscure gardening tools, another small purchase to fill the time. I expected the usual routine, a quick signature, a polite nod, and the click of the door closing. I pulled the door open, ready with a practiced, neutral smile. But the young man on my doorstep was different. He couldn't have been more than 23, with earnest, tired eyes and a jawline that suggested he hadn't fully grown into his own face yet. He wore a standardish navy polo and khaki pants, the uniform of his trade, but he wore it with a kind of unassuming dignity. A name badge that read Leo hung from a lanyard around his neck. He was holding a cardboard box, and when he looked at me, he didn't just look past me, he met my eyes. There was a warmth in his gaze, a flicker of genuine presence that cut through my solitary haze. He wasn't just going through the motions. He smiled, a real, unforced smile that reached his eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice clear and respectful. "I have a delivery for Eleanor." "That's me," I replied, my own smile feeling a little more genuine than usual as I took the package. As my fingers brushed his, I noticed the faint tremor in his hand, the sign of a long day already underway. An impulse, born of a sudden, strange empathy, took over. "You look like you've been running all morning." He blinked, a little surprised by the personal observation. A soft chuckle escaped him. "It's that kind of day," he admitted. "And it's not even noon yet." "Well," I said, my voice firmer than I expected, "you look like you could use a glass of lemonade." He hesitated, his gaze shifting towards his dented delivery van parked at the curb. I could see the internal calculation. The schedule, the rules, the pressure to keep moving. "That's very kind of you, but I've got a whole route to finish." "I really shouldn't." "Nonsense," I insisted, gesturing towards the open doorway. 5 minutes. A break is a mandate for sanity, not a luxury. Something in my tone must have conveyed that I wasn't just being polite. I truly wanted him to stay. I was suddenly tired of the silence, of the fleeting, impersonal encounters. He considered it for another second, a small, weary smile playing on his lips. "I guess I could use some hydration," he conceded, and I felt a small, unexpected victory. He stepped over the threshold, and the quiet of the house was instantly changed by his presence. He walked in with a carefulness, as if he was afraid of disturbing the pristine order of the foyer. His eyes took in the high ceilings, the minimalist art on the walls, the flood of natural light from the floor to ceiling windows. I saw not envy, but a quiet, thoughtful observation in his gaze. It was a home built on success, but it was also just a space, and I was acutely aware of how he, a stranger, filled it with a life it had been missing. "I'm Eleanor, by the way," I said, leading him towards the kitchen. "Leo," he replied, his voice a little softer now that he was inside. "Thank you for the drink. And for this," he added, gesturing vaguely around the room. I followed his gaze. The kitchen was all clean lines and stainless steel, a place David had designed with meticulous care. Now, it was just the room where I made my solitary meals. I poured 2 tall glasses of freshly made lemonade, the ice clinking cheerfully. We sat at the enormous kitchen island, a slab of white quartz that could easily seat 10. He kept his worn backpack on, a clear signal that he didn't intend to stay long, and I found that detail oddly endearing. I told myself I wouldn't keep him more than 10 minutes. He asked me how my morning was, and I found myself answering honestly, telling him about the recalcitrant rose bush I'd been wrestling with. The conversation flowed with a surprising ease. He didn't seem intimidated by the house or by me. He was just present, engaged, and disarmingly real. I don't know why I did it, but I started talking. I told him I'd been married once, that my husband had passed away 3 years ago. I described the shock of it, a sudden heart attack on a flight to Hong Kong for a business deal. I recounted the awful, surreal hours of waiting by the phone, knowing something was wrong but not knowing what, until the airline finally called. I spoke of it with a distance that comes only after you've cried all the tears there are to cry. I told him how the grief had settled into a quiet acceptance, a permanent roommate in this big, empty house. I mentioned that I hadn't dated, that I didn't feel I had the space in my heart for that kind of connection anymore. I confessed that some days were profoundly lonely, but that was simply the shape of my life now. Throughout it all, he didn't offer platitudes or easy comforts. He just listened, his expression full of a quiet, profound empathy that was far beyond his years. I don't normally invite delivery drivers inside for refreshments, I admitted with a small, self-conscious smile, tapping my fingernail against my glass. But there's something about you, he offered a wry grin. Must be the overwhelming scent of van exhaust and cardboard, he joked, and I laughed, a genuine, full-throated laugh that felt rusty from disuse. No, I said, my tone growing more serious. You listen, really listen. Most people don't do that anymore. We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. It wasn't awkward. It felt settled. Then, before I could lose my nerve, I asked him if he'd like to come back for lunch sometime. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise and maybe even hope. He told me he'd like that very much. We exchanged numbers, my fingers feeling clumsy as I typed his name into my phone. I walked him back to the front door, the brief interaction feeling more significant than it had any right to be. As he stepped back out into the bright spring sunshine, I said, "Don't be a stranger, Leo. Don't wait too long to use that number." He nodded, gave me one last genuine smile, and walked back to his van. I watched him drive away, the afternoon stretching out before me, feeling less empty than it had just 10 minutes before. He hadn't just been a courier with a box. He had been a person, a connection, and I hadn't realized until that moment just how desperately I had been craving one. Almost 2 weeks passed. In that time, I thought about the young man on my doorstep for more than I probably should have. It wasn't a romantic fantasy. It was the memory of a real human connection that had briefly pierced the veil of my solitude. In my years in this house, I'd had hundreds of packages delivered. I'd interacted with countless faces, but most were a blur of polite indifference. They never looked me in the eye, never asked about my day, never lingered. But Leo, he had seen me. He had looked at me and seen a person, not just a name on a shipping label. Still, he didn't text, and he didn't call. I told myself it was for the best. What was I to him, really? Just a lonely woman in a big house who had been unusually kind one afternoon. He was young, busy, with his own life to live. Maybe he'd been weirded out by the invitation. Maybe he'd lost my number. Maybe he had forgotten all about me the moment he drove out of my neighborhood. A part of me, the part that had grown accustomed to disappointment, believed that was the case. But another, smaller part hoped it wasn't. It was a Monday morning. I didn't have any errands to run, no appointments on the calendar. The house was, as always, deathly quiet. I was in my study, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured garden, the phone resting on the desk beside me. I picked it up and looked at his contact, just the name, Leo, and a number I had somehow memorized. I considered deleting it, telling myself it was foolish to hold on to this small, unlikely thread of hope. What if he thought I was some strange, predatory older woman? The thought made my cheeks flush. I put the phone down. But the silence of the house pressed in on me, and I thought of his tired, kind eyes. I thought about the way he had listened. Just as I was about to give up on the idea entirely, my phone rang. I saw his name on the screen and my heart gave a strange, unexpected leap. I let it ring twice before answering, trying to compose my voice. Hello. Hi, this is Leo, from the delivery. A couple of weeks ago, I was the guy who. His voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. I cut him off gently, a smile spreading across my face. The guy I offered lemonade to. I could hear the relief in his laugh. Yeah, that guy. I was starting to wonder if you'd forgotten. Of course not, I said warmly. I saved your number, Leo. I figured you'd either decided I was a very peculiar lady or you were just shy. A little of both, maybe, he admitted, his honesty disarming me all over again. Well, I said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I'm glad you called. Are you still interested in that lunch? No pressure, of course. There was a brief pause on his end, and I could faintly hear the sounds of someone shouting in the background. Yeah, he said, his voice suddenly firm. I'd love that. I gave him the address again, even though I suspected he remembered it. I spent the rest of the morning with a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years. I planned a simple but elegant meal, wanting to offer him something nourishing, something real. When the doorbell rang precisely at noon, I felt a flutter of anticipation. I opened the door, and there he was. He wasn't in his uniform this time. He wore a clean, though slightly wrinkled, button-down shirt and dark jeans. He wasn't carrying a package. He was just a young man standing on my porch, and the sight felt entirely different, more personal. He looked genuinely happy to see me. You're right on time, I smiled. Come on in. The house smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary. I led him into the kitchen where the table was already set for two. His eyes widened slightly when he saw it. I realized he must have thought my offer was casual, perhaps not even serious. I hope you're hungry, I said, turning to the oven. He offered to help, but I waved him off gently, telling him to just relax. We sat down to eat roasted chicken with lemon and herbs, a quinoa salad, and fresh asparagus. It was simple food, but it was made with care. He ate with an appetite that told me he hadn't had a home-cooked meal in a long time. This is incredible, he said. Honestly, the last thing I ate that wasn't from a vending machine probably expired last month. I raised an eyebrow, a flicker of concern crossing my features. Are you still staying in that hostel you mentioned? He nodded, a little sheepishly. It's what I can afford. It works for now. There was a moment of silence between us, but I made sure it contained no judgment, only a thoughtful curiosity. You didn't tell me much about yourself last time we spoke, I said gently. What brought you to Philadelphia? And so he told me. He painted a vivid picture of his life, of a small, forgotten town in rural Pennsylvania. He spoke of being the oldest of 6 boys, crammed into a tiny house that was always loud and always lacking. He described his father's calloused hands from working double shifts at a factory, and his mother's perpetual exhaustion from cleaning other people's houses. He told me how he'd practically raised his younger brothers, changing diapers and making meals when he was barely a teenager himself. He talked about the promise he'd made to himself, a silent vow to not get stuck, to build something different, something better. He described saving for months, working odd jobs stocking shelves, washing cars, anything he could find to buy a one-way bus ticket to the city, arriving with nothing but a bag of clothes and a fierce, desperate hope. As he spoke, I didn't just hear his words. I saw the young man he was, forged by hardship but not broken by it. He was a survivor, a builder, just like my David had been. He listened with an intensity that was rare, his eyes never leaving mine. When he finished, I was quiet for a long moment. You didn't just come here for yourself, I said softly, the realization dawning on me. You came here to carry your entire family on your back. He simply nodded, his expression resolute. That's the plan. I want my parents to be able to rest one day. I want my brothers to have options I never did. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a boy, but a man with a purpose clearer and nobler than that of most men twice his age. That's an exceptionally rare quality, I told him. Most young men are chasing far more selfish things. He shrugged, a hint of a smile on his face. Maybe I'm just built differently. Another pause settled over the table, this one feeling more significant. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. So why, I asked, my voice steady, are you still living in that dreadful place? He gave the only answer he could. Because it's all I can afford. I didn't argue. I didn't offer a lecture. I simply stood up, carried my plate to the sink, and rinsed it. The decision had already formed in my mind, clear and certain. I turned to face him, my heart beating with a strange, new resolve. Well, I said, that ends today. He blinked, a look of utter confusion on his face. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath. You're moving in here. He laughed, a startled, disbelieving sound. Wait, you're serious? Completely serious, I affirmed. I have 3 empty bedrooms upstairs. I have more quiet in this house than any one person needs. You will have your own room, your own space. No rent, no strings attached. Just a chance to live like a human being for a change. Eleanor, I can't possibly accept that, he said, his voice firm but his eyes wide with shock. That's far too much. It's not charity, Leo, I insisted, my voice softening. It's a solution. You need a safe place to land, and frankly, I could use a little more life in this house. Consider it an exchange. Your presence for my peace of mind. He hesitated, the conflict warring on his face. I knew his pride was fighting against the sheer overwhelming relief of the offer, but I also knew what it was like to be exhausted down to your bones, to be sleeping in a place where you never felt safe, to wake up every morning already tired. Kindness like this, when you are that deep in the struggle, feels less like a choice and more like a lifeline. I don't even have enough stuff to fill a closet, he said, a weak attempt at a joke. I smiled, knowing I had one. That just makes the move easier, I said. You can be here by tomorrow. And just like that, the tectonic plates of my quiet life began to shift. The next morning, for the first time in 3 years, the house felt different when I woke up. It wasn't just the light slanting through the blinds. There was a new energy, a subtle awareness of another person's presence. I had slept more soundly than I had in ages, knowing he was safe in the guest room down the hall. He had arrived the previous evening with a single, worn duffel bag containing his entire life, a few changes of clothes, a phone charger, and a new toothbrush. I hadn't made a fuss. I simply showed him to the room, pointed out the fresh towels, and told him the kitchen was his to use as he pleased. I told him he could stay for as long as he needed, and I meant every word. I padded barefoot into the kitchen and found him already there, standing awkwardly by the coffee maker, as if unsure of the rules. He was already dressed for work in his uniform. Good morning, I said with a warm smile. Did you sleep all right? He turned, a look of genuine, unrestrained relief on his face. Like I was in a coma, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. That mattress is dangerously comfortable. I laughed, the sound feeling natural and easy in my own home. I told you. There was no reason for you to be living in that hostel. I made us both breakfast scrambled eggs, toast with avocado, a far cry from the vending machine dinners he was used to. He insisted on cleaning up afterward, a small gesture that I understood was about maintaining his sense of dignity and contribution. I didn't argue. Later that day, while he was at work, I felt a strange sense of purpose. I went about my own errands, but the house didn't feel empty upon my return. It felt like a home again, waiting for someone to return to it. That evening, I offered to help him with a task he mentioned, organizing a storage closet I had been avoiding for months. It wasn't much, but working side by side felt companionable. I knew it mattered to him to feel like he was earning his keep, not just accepting charity, and I respected that more than he could know. The week unfolded in this new rhythm. He would leave for his delivery route early in the morning, and I would have the quiet house to myself. But it was a different kind of quiet now, one of anticipation rather than absence. When he returned in the evening, tired and dusty from the road, the house would come alive again. We'd share dinner in the kitchen or on the back patio. We talked about everything and nothing: the books I was reading, the ridiculous customers he encountered, the music we both liked. And sometimes the conversation would drift to deeper waters. We spoke of our pasts, our goals, our quiet regrets. I never judged his ambition, and he never pitied my grief. It was an exchange of stories, a building of trust that created a bond I hadn't expected. It was the friendship of a mother and a son, two lonely souls finding an unlikely family in each other. One evening, we were sitting on the patio as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of lavender and rose. I had poured us each a glass of wine. "Do you ever think about giving up and going back home?" I asked him gently. He shook his head without a moment's hesitation. "Not yet. There's still too much to do here." I nodded, understanding completely. "And what will you do when you're finished?" He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the garden. "I don't know for sure. Maybe start my own business. A small courier service. Do it right. Hire guys who are in the same spot I was. Give them a fair wage. Treat them with respect." A genuine smile touched my lips. "That's a wonderful idea, Leo." I looked at him, at the quiet determination in his profile against the fading light. He had a strength that was both fierce and gentle. "You're putting down roots here," I said softly, "even if you can't see them yet." He didn't reply, just took a sip of his wine, and we let the peaceful moment hang in the air between us. A few weeks later, I had a board meeting in Boston, a mandatory trip that would take me away for 2 nights. I asked him if he'd be alright staying in the house by himself. He laughed, a bright, easy sound. "I think I can manage. This is the nicest place I've ever been left unsupervised." When I left, the house felt quiet again, but it was a temporary stillness, not the crushing emptiness of before. While I was gone, he kept busy, working his long hours and, as I would later discover, tackling several projects around the house that I had mentioned in passing. On the second night of my trip, I called to check in. "Hello," he answered, his voice warm and familiar. "Just wanted to make sure you haven't burned the house down," I teased. "Not yet," he replied. "The pantry is, however, now organized alphabetically." I was procrastinating on my laundry. I laughed. "I knew I could trust you." We talked for a few more minutes, a simple, comfortable chat. Before we hung up, I said, "I'll be home around noon tomorrow. I'll pick up stuff for lunch." "Pasta sounds good, right?" "Sounds perfect," he said. "See you tomorrow." After the call ended, I sat in my sterile hotel room, thinking about how strange and yet how perfectly right my life had become. 3 months ago, I was a widow rattling around in an empty mansion. Now, I was coordinating lunch plans with a young man who felt impossibly like family. I arrived home the next day just after noon, just as I'd said. As I walked in, the scent of garlic and basil met me. Leo was in the kitchen, a dish towel slung over his shoulder, stirring a pot of tomato sauce. He had already poured 2 glasses of wine. "Smells amazing in here," I said, setting my bags down with a contented sigh. "Welcome home," he smiled. "How was the trip?" "Successful but tiring." "The house is still standing, I see." We ate at the kitchen island, the easy comfort between us now a familiar blanket. After lunch, as I was unpacking, I remembered something. I came back downstairs holding a fresh set of towels. "By the way, I completely forgot to mention, my daughter Sophia is coming to visit this weekend." He froze for a fraction of a second, his hands still in the soapy water of the sink. "Oh," he said, "I didn't realize you had a daughter." "She's at Stanford, but she's flying in for a few days to see her old mom." "That's great," he said, his voice carefully neutral. I nodded, missing or perhaps choosing to ignore the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. "I've told her all about you. She's excited to meet you." I handed him the clean towels, my mind already on preparing Sophia's room. "You'll love her," I added breezily. "She has my sharp wit but far more energy." And as I walked away, I had a sudden, certain premonition that the quiet, stable world we had built was about to change once again. Saturday morning began with that peaceful quiet I had grown to love, the soft morning light streaming through the large kitchen windows. I was sipping my first cup of coffee when I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway, followed by the slam of a door. Sophia was here. I saw Leo, who had been making his own coffee, tense up slightly. His movements became a little too quick, a little too deliberate as he wiped an imaginary spill from the counter. I smiled to myself, took a deep breath, and walked to the front door to greet my daughter. The moment she stepped inside, the energy in the house shifted, brightening by several megawatts. Sophia was a whirlwind of life, all smiles and hugs and stories tumbling out of her. At 21, she had my eyes but David's confident grin. She was dressed in her usual student uniform jeans and a university hoodie, her hair in a ponytail, but she carried herself with an easy grace. I turned to where Leo was standing near the entrance to the kitchen. "Leo," I said, my voice warm. "This is my daughter, Sophia." "Sophia, this is Leo, the wonderful young man I told you about." Sophia's eyes lit up with recognition. She looked him up and down with a playful curiosity. "So, you're the one," she said, her tone teasing. "The one who thinks my mom doesn't look a day over 25. Leo blushed, a faint flush creeping up his neck, but he laughed. "Guilty as charged," he admitted. "He's being modest," I interjected. "He's practically running the place now." Sophia dropped her bags and stretched dramatically. "God, I forgot how good it feels to be in a house that doesn't smell like a mixture of old pizza and desperation. My dorm is a glorified closet." We all moved into the living room, Sophia chattering on about her classes and friends. I made a point of including Leo in the conversation, drawing him out, making it clear he wasn't a guest but a part of our little household. Those words, "your family now," slipped out without a second thought, and I saw from the look on his face that they landed with more weight than I intended. Later that afternoon, the three of us sat on the back patio. I had made a fresh pitcher of lemonade, a callback to my first meeting with Leo. Sophia was showing us pictures on her phone, narrating a hilarious story about one of her professors. She was effervescent and sharp, and I watched as Leo relaxed in her presence, drawn in by her easy humor. At one point, my phone rang with a call I had to take, and I stepped back inside, leaving them alone. When I glanced out the window a few moments later, I saw them in a quiet, serious conversation. Sophia was looking at him with a direct, assessing gaze. "You don't seem like someone who's just a house guest," I heard her say. I saw Leo shrug. "It sort of just happened. Your mom is incredibly kind. She doesn't just let people in," Sophia replied, her voice soft but firm. "Not since my dad died." She looked down for a moment, then met his gaze again. "He was the last person she brought into her life. So you being here, it means something." I felt a pang in my chest, a mix of sorrow for the past and a strange hope for the future. I left them to their conversation. "I'm glad it's you," I overheard Sophia say as I walked away. "You seem real." That evening, we ate dinner together, the three of us. Sophia helped me cook while Leo set the table. The dynamic felt startlingly natural, as if we had been doing this for years. It felt like a family. After I went to bed, exhausted from the excitement of the day, I heard their low voices and laughter continuing from the living room. They stayed up late, talking. The next day, Sophia insisted on dragging me on a shopping trip. When we returned, laden with bags, we found Leo had done the laundry and tidied the kitchen. That evening, he and Sophia went for a long walk around the neighborhood. When they returned, I saw a new ease between them, a new level of comfort. As they stood at the front door, I heard Sophia say, "I'm really glad we met, Leo." She hesitated. "I know this might sound forward, but if you ever just wanted to talk more, I'd really like that." "Yeah," he replied softly. "I'd like that too." That night, lying in my bed, I knew what was happening. It wasn't complicated. It was simple and clear. My daughter, who was kind and strong and bright, was connecting with this young man who was also kind and strong and honorable. In a way, it felt like I had orchestrated it, not with intention, but by simply opening my door that one afternoon. I realized that for the first time in a very long time, Leo didn't seem like someone just passing through my life. He was becoming a part of its very fabric. That one small act of kindness, offering a tired boy a glass of lemonade, had set in motion a chain of events that was bringing life and hope back into my quiet world in ways I could never have predicted. My relationship with Leo had settled into a beautiful, easy rhythm. It was a bond built on mutual respect and deep, platonic affection. I was his mentor, his confidant, his surrogate mother, and he was the steady, grounding presence that had chased the deepest shadows from my house. But everything had subtly recalibrated the moment Sophia walked through the door. After her first visit, she and Leo stayed in constant contact. Their texts and calls were frequent, a gentle hum of a connection growing stronger across the miles. Each time she came home to visit, the bond between them was deeper, the unspoken feelings more palpable. It was a slow, beautiful burn, with no rush and no pressure. One evening, I was out at a book club meeting, and they were home alone. I came back late to find them on the back patio, the fairy lights I'd strung up casting a soft glow. They were sitting in comfortable silence, watching the stars. As I watched from the kitchen window, I saw Sophia reach over and gently take his hand. He didn't pull away. He simply intertwined his fingers with hers. And in that quiet, simple gesture, I knew they were no longer just two people getting along. They were two people who had found in each other something rare and unexpected. From that night on, the pretense fell away. They were a couple, moving with a quiet certainty that needed no grand announcement. Sophia, ever direct, told me about it a few days later. I just smiled, my heart full. There were no questions, no interrogations. I simply told her what I had been feeling for weeks. I had a feeling, I said to her. It's wonderful. Later, when Leo and I were alone in the kitchen, I told him, she looks at you, you know, the same way her father used to look at me. The look of profound relief on his face was all the thanks I needed. Their lives began to move forward, both individually and together. Sophia finished her final year of college with honors. Leo, with his relentless work ethic, had been promoted at the Courier company. He was no longer a driver but a logistics coordinator, a desk job with better pay and regular hours, a crucial step up. He was saving, planning, always looking ahead. Sophia visited more and more often. During one of her visits, she and Leo took a weekend trip to the Poconos, camping by a river. When they came back, they were glowing. She told me she had been offered a remote position with a tech startup, a job she could do from anywhere. I want to come home, Mom, she said, her eyes shining. I want to be here, close to you, close to Leo. When she moved back to Philadelphia for good, she stayed with me at first, but it was clear they were ready for their own space. They started looking for a place of their own, and after a few weeks, they found a small, charming 2-bedroom rental only a 15-minute drive away. It had a little backyard and beautiful hardwood floors. It wasn't my grand house, but it was a perfect start for them. On their moving day, I insisted on helping. I filled their new pantry with groceries, bought them a set of good knives, and pressed a white envelope into Leo's hand. He tried to refuse, his pride flaring, but I gave him a look that silenced his protests. This is not charity, Leo, I said firmly but lovingly. This is an investment in my family's happiness. You have earned this, and so much more. We hugged at their new front door, and I whispered in his ear, you changed my life too. You brought the light back in. That night, as I drove back to my now quiet house, it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. I imagined them sleeping on a mattress on the floor of their new home, surrounded by boxes, full of hope. It was enough. A year later, Leo proposed. He did it on a Sunday morning, in their sun-drenched kitchen, while they were making pancakes. He didn't have a speech prepared. He just slipped the ring on her finger as she was stirring the batter. She called me moments later, crying and laughing at the same time. We held the wedding in my backyard. It was a small, intimate affair with only their closest friends and our family. There was no opulent venue, just sunshine, good food, and real, palpable love. Sophia was radiant. Leo looked at her with an adoration that made my heart ache with joy. During the reception, I gave a toast. A little over 2 years ago, a stranger walked up to my front door with a package, I said, my voice thick with emotion as I looked at Leo. Today, that stranger is my son, and he is marrying the greatest love of my life. Welcome to the family, Leo. In truth, you were already here. After the wedding, I gave them another gift, a substantial sum from the trust David had left. I told them it was for their future. Leo, with his usual sense of responsibility, used a portion of it to finally realize his dream. He opened his own small courier company, First Step Logistics. He started with 2 used vans and 3 drivers, all young men like him, hardworking and overlooked. He paid them well and treated them with the respect he had so rarely been shown. Life settled into a new, wonderful normal. Emma and Leo built their life together, brick by brick. They were solid, honest, and so deeply in love. Eventually, the talk turned to children, a future I looked forward to with every fiber of my being. Now, when Leo visits, we often sit on the porch, drinking tea and talking about business, books, and life. Every time he leaves, I find myself saying the same thing with a smile. I always knew that compliment of yours was going to lead somewhere important. Looking back, it's almost impossible to believe that a single, impulsive offer of lemonade could so completely alter the course of not just my life, but all of our lives. But it did. Because sometimes the biggest, most beautiful changes begin with the smallest, most unassuming acts of kindness.